is mildly groovy. It is groovy in a way that's kind of too cool to hit you over the head with its grooviness, right? Am I right? Hey fiddlers, welcome to today's fiddle video. Today we're gonna be diving into one of my favorite things, which is reel bowing patterns. I love talking about bowing patterns because they can make a huge difference in the feel of the tune just by changing which notes are connected and which are separated out. So I'm gonna tell you about 3 different bowing patterns that I use an awful lot when I am playing reels. We're going to talk about the 1 down, 3 up pattern, the good old Georgia shuffle, and the 3 separate, 3 slurred, 2 separate pattern. If you'd like a cheat sheet that shows you these 3 bowing patterns, you'll find a link in the description for that. Today I'm going to be using the tune Temperance Reel to demonstrate these ideas, and you'll also find a link in the description for my tutorial on how to play that tune. Also, this tune often starts out with a pickup note, and for the purposes of simplifying things for this video, I'll be leaving that out, just so you know. Alright, let's get to work. When you're talking about bowing patterns in fiddling, it's important to remember that these vary significantly depending on the player, maybe depending on the tradition, and you don't really have to stick to particular patterns all the time. These are rules that are often mixed and matched or broken completely. But this at least gives you some ideas, which can be a bit of a starting point. Another thing I wanted to mention is that bowing patterns could be thought of more as a movement with your arm, a sort of rhythmic pattern that your arm does, rather than certain notes being slurred and other notes being separate. It winds up working out that way a lot of the time, but what you're really looking for is what is the groove that your arm is creating. So maybe your arm is doing this along with the beat. Kind of a quick down bow and then a slow up bow. Down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up. Or maybe it's doing that on the offbeat, so it'll sound like this. So again, it's a quick down bow and a slow up bow, but where that down bow happens is in between the beats in a way. Down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up. Or it might be doing something that is a little bit more complicated, like this. So you've got a down, up, down, and then a slow up, and then a down, up. Down, up, 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 etc. So practicing bowing patterns, I think, actually is a lot about just practicing that motion with your arm, getting comfortable with that motion, and then using that in a tune in various places. I very often mix up these bowing patterns, and it's rare that I'll stick with one for a big chunk of the tune. Kind of keeps things interesting. So let's talk about bowing pattern number 1, which is the 1 down, 3 up pattern. If we use that a whole bunch in Temperance Reel, this is what it'll sound like. Feel of that slurring pattern. I might think of it as sort of solid, maybe even a little stodgy, really hitting that downbeat. So if you think of the beat in reels being on the 1 and the 3, 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. What you're doing is you're putting the down bow on that downbeat note, and then you're doing an up bow for the other notes. So what your arm there is doing is if you have a set of 4 eighth notes, you just do a fast down bow for the first one and then a slow up bow for the next 3. And with the next 4 eighth notes, you can do the same thing. So when do you use this bowing pattern? Well, it's up to you. It creates a pretty strong downbeat, which you actually might not always want, because sometimes you want a little bit more of an emphasis on the offbeat of the tune, or just not to hammer home that downbeat too much. I actually tend to use this bowing pattern pretty sparingly. I would not recommend necessarily playing it all the way through the tune. But where I do like to use it in particular is when I have a tune that has one note on one string followed by 3/8 notes or a dotted quarter or a roll on another string. So again, here's that A part of temperance reel with mostly 1 down, 3 up bowing. All right, bowing pattern number 2 is the Georgia Shuffle. Here's what the Georgia Shuffle would sound like if we used it a good bit in the A part of temperance reel. 1, 2, 3, 4. So that bowing pattern has a groovier, more offbeat feel. The Georgia Shuffle actually helps you accent the 2 and the 4, so kind of the offbeat of the tune. So your arm is still doing this. Kind of a 1 down, 3 up pattern like before, but the down bow is between the down beats, so it's on the offbeat. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. So it's a 1 down, 3 up starting on the offbeat. Here that is in slow motion. We're starting with an up bow for the beginning of the measure for that first quarter note's worth of notes. And then that's when our 1 down, 3 up pattern starts on the offbeat this time. 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and. This works in passages which are chock full of eighth notes. You can just get into that groove and keep right on going. But you can use that pattern even if some longer notes wind up being involved. For example, in the B part we have some eighth notes for a while and then a quarter note. But if you're in that Georgia Shuffle pattern, that quarter note fits right in. I think it's helpful to think about it in terms of the pattern that your arm is in, rather than necessarily which notes are slurred together and which ones are separate. I wouldn't necessarily use Georgia Shuffle all the way through a tune. There might be other players who would use it more extensively than I do, but it does create this really cool driving feel for the tune. Again, here's that A part of the tune with Georgia Shuffle. We now get to the third slurring pattern, and this is one of my favorites. It's a 3 separate, 3 slurred, 2 separate pattern. Here's what that might sound like in the context of temperance reel. 1, 2, 3, 4. So what I like about this pattern is that it is groovy, but I would say it is mildly groovy. It is groovy in a way that's kind of too cool to hit you over the head with its grooviness, right? Am I right? And I think that's because this bowing pattern allows you to give a little bit more emphasis to that 2 and 4 without being too extreme about it. So now what your arm is doing is this. Down, up, down, up, down, up. And you might repeat that. So it might go down, up, 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 down, up. Here's what the bow is doing in a set of 8 eighth notes. It's going down, up, down, and then slurring 3 on the up bow, and then doing 2 separate bows. Down, up. Again, you could use this in places that don't have all eighth notes. For example, in that B part, you could still use that 3-3-2 bowing, even though you'll encounter some quarter notes. As far as when to use this bowing, I tend to use it a great deal. Because this pattern is stretched out over 8/8 notes, I feel like it doesn't really hit you over the head with its patterniness, even if you use it over and over again in a tune. You might use it if you want to give your tune a little bit of groove, but you don't want to be over the top about it. Or if you want a nice mixture of choppy and smooth textures in your tune. It's also a great slurring pattern if you play with a little bit of swing, which I tend to. This is a whole other topic, but if you're playing with swing, you've got a little bit of long, short, long, short, long, short going on. Maybe not quite that much swing, but you get the idea. And if you play with swing, the danger is you're gonna run out of bow, especially if you were playing all separate bows, because the long note is on a down bow and the short note is the up bow and might not make up for it. This bowing pattern makes up for lost ground. So once more, here is that A part with 3/3/2 bowing. 1, 2, 3, 4. So here's the thing, I really like to mix and match these bowings and come up with some sort of blend of all of these different things. I think it creates a nice nuanced sound. Plus I find that some slurring patterns work better at certain parts of the tune than others. So here's the tune with a mix of those different bowings. Let's start with an up bow so we can get into the Georgia shuffle here. Down, up, down, up, down, up, down, up. And then we're gonna do 1 down, 3 up. Do that again. And then 3/3/2 bowing. Putting it together and going on with the tune, here's what that'll sound like. 1, 2, 3, 4. Alright fiddlers, that wraps up today's video. I hope you enjoyed learning these bowing patterns and I hope you enjoy putting them into your tunes. Again, if you'd like a cheat sheet that shows all 3 of those bowing patterns written out, you'll find a link to that in the description. You'll also find a link for sheet music for Temperance Reel, and there will be 3 different versions of that, each one of them focusing primarily on one of the bowing patterns that we talked about today, and that'll give you a chance to practice those patterns in the context of that tune. And if you'd like a tutorial on how to play Temperance Reel, just the basic tune, you'll find a link for that in the description. Whew, that's a lot of stuff. Have a wonderful day, happy fiddling, and I'll see you soon.